So when I was 19 years old, I moved to Austin to go to UT Austin. And I lived in a women's cooperative, so we did everything. It was probably 20 women. We did the cooking for ourselves. We cleaned the house. We would rotate how to do things. So it was the first time that I learned how to cook in large quantities because my family was a tiny family. It was my mom and daddy and me. So I only knew how to cook in little quantities. Suddenly I'm cooking for 20 people. And it was really amazing because I got to cook the things that I had seen my mother cook all those years. Like I even made tortillas and chiles rellenos. I learned how to make fried chicken. Actually, it's the only time I ever made fried chicken. The one and only time was in that co-op. And then I moved out and I had a roommate at one point from Paris, Texas. Her name was Shelly, and she was African American, and she said she had chosen me as her roommate because she wanted to see what Mexicans were like. So I was like, that's cool. Let's see if we have things in common. And the only thing we turned out having in common was rice and beans. She says, the way you cook reminds me of the way that we cook in Paris, Texas. It's different kinds of beans, but we're beans and rice people too. So that was a good connection to make. When I started to live on my own, then I was always cooking what my mother cooked. I cooked exactly what she cooked. Like I cooked fideo, which was one of my favorite things she made, meatloaf. I loved meatloaf. So it was a combination of like traditional American food and traditional Mexican food. When I think about the foods that my mama cooked, they're the same foods I cook now. I still cook fried cabbage, and I can eat a whole cabbage by myself. And I still cook frijoles in the way that she cooked frijoles. I still cook arroz in the way that she cooked arroz. So I've maintained all of her foods except for liver. I never will cook liver. She was a big lover of liver and lengua, and I don't do those two. But other than that, I've always cooked the same food. Other than that, I've always cooked the same foods that she cooks. But what happened was that I started to learn more about cooking from other people when I was in my 40s. In my 40s, I started to go to Mexico, mostly to La Ciudad de Mexico and also to the state of Morelos, to different indigenous villages. And that's where I started to learn more. So I know that my mother cooked nopales, for example, when I was little, but I don't have a really strong memory of that because she didn't do it too often. But then as I started to go to Mexico, nopales, amaranto, different traditional foods from central and southern Mexico started to be something important to me. So I had teachers in Mexico who taught me, for example, about los siete guerreros. There was a university in one of the indigenous towns in Morelos called Universidad Nahuatl. And I went there and took classes about los siete guerreros and learned about the very traditional foods that were the basis of our ancient ways of eating. So corn, beans, squash, chile, amaranto, maguey. That's what I remember. I'm missing one food. I don't know. But, and I started to share those siete guerreros with people here in El Paso. And even with my classes, I would tell them in my Mexican American history classes. So, what are the foods that you eat when you go to a Mexican restaurant? And they would say enchiladas, they would say tamales, they would say calabacitas. And I would say, well, let's look at that and how many of those foods are ancient. So the tamales are something pre-Hispanic, although of course they didn't use pork. The calabacitas, except for the queso, is totally pre-Hispanic. We had onion, we had corn, we had calabazas, we had tomatoes. The enchiladas, the chile, We had, I don't know how many hundreds of different chiles in our diet. And all of these things are things that I believe that we have a memory of. So when we eat something that's corn, to me, we're going back to those really ancient memories. Corn is something that we've had a relationship with for 8,000 years. And I say a relationship with that plant because corn cannot live without us. And for thousands of years, we could not live without corn. We have to plant the corn in order for it to grow. And we eat the corn in turn to honor it. So there's one of my favorite images from one of the codices, the ancient books, is a woman that's putting corn into a pot to boil, but you see the little glyph where she's speaking to the corn. And I've always thought, what is she saying to that corn? Is she saying, thank you, corn? Because the corn gave up its life to nurture us, to give us nutrition. So she's saying, thank you, corn. Is she saying, sorry, corn, I'm putting you into this hot water? But she has something that she's saying to that corn. And to me, that is the relationship that I would love to have with what I put into my body. And it's something I work on. Having grown up in the 60s, when frozen TV dinners were like super exciting, and sometimes we would have them and we'd be really happy. It's hard to have that relationship sometimes because I was raised distant from fresh corn. We always had canned corn, for example. In fact, I can think of very few things that we ate fresh. It was all processed in the 60s. So I want that relationship of understanding. And I've tried to grow corn in order to have that relationship. I've tried to grow different plantitas. I've been most successful at growing amaranto because in El Paso we think of it as a weed, like it just grows. So I've been most successful there. And it means a lot to me to be showing my grandchildren that relationship. Because if I grew up distant from the source of food, they're growing up even more distant from the source of food. When I grew up, to have fast food was once every few weeks, maybe. They have it several times a week. So they are even more distant from understanding food. And what I find with Joaquin, my grandson, is he's the one that connects to that ancientness of what it's like to have a relationship with the natural food. So I was teaching him once how to roast corn on a comal, and I had him put his hand on the corn, and you could feel it transforming. You could feel the heat affecting it. And he was so surprised that he could feel the corn changing. So he understands that food is something that you don't just taste, but I teach him smell it. I teach him feel it when it's cooking, and also listen, because we could hear the corn making little noises as it was roasting. And he's the one that really gets it. He really gets it. That makes me really happy. I love cheese. Cheese is one of my favorite things. And I have to tell you this story. One time I was in this little town in Chihuahua, and there's a plant here that grows that you use to make asadero cheese. And you use it to coagulate the milk. So I was in this little pueblito in Chihuahua where they all make asadero cheese. And the lady was super proud showing me her cheese. And then she said, but you can't make it in the United States. You don't have this plant. And I said, we have that plant everywhere in El Paso. It's considered a weed. And she was so shocked that a plant would live in the United States that was Mexican to her. So I love cheese, so that I started making cheese. And it's really changed my relationship to cheese, to make it. I taught my granddaughter how to make it a few weeks ago, and because it's chemistry too. So we had a gallon of whole milk, and we were slowly heating it up. And I told her when the little bubbles form around the sides of the pot, that's when we know to start adding vinegar, because that's what we use. So she added 1/3 of a cup of vinegar, and you could see an immediate reaction, and the milk was coagulating. Then she added the second, and we were stirring, and a little bit more of a reaction. When she added the last of the vinegar, boom, it all coagulated, and you could see the cheese and the whey, the liquid, separate. And she couldn't believe it that it happened so fast. And it was delicious. We put little jalapenos in it and sea salt, and it was really delicious how it came out. So what I've learned in teaching my grandchildren how to cook, and it's mostly vegetables and cheese, is that it changes my relationship with food. So when I spend, for example, a whole morning with Joaquin, and we're grinding pumpkin seeds, and we're putting a lot of thought and a lot of attention into grinding them like we're supposed to, and he has his molcajete and I have mine. After that, like having that close connection with food, I don't want to go out and have a hamburger. That doesn't seem like food to me anymore. And I'm a big junk food person. So for me to suddenly say, oh, that's not really food, is a big change in my life. And it's all coming from spending very dedicated time with especially Joaquin, teaching him how to do things slowly, carefully, with a lot of attention and a lot of intention. So it's been pretty miraculous to me.